All right, guys, ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to be talking about the nervous system. That's right, the nervous system. We just had vocabulary. We talked about the different parts of a neuron. We're going to talk about that again. But first, I want to talk about why we have those parts of the neuron. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a real picture of a neuron. This came from what we call a scanning electron microscope. It's much better than the microscopes that we had in the classroom setting. Those classroom microscopes are based on light. Light goes up through the image into the lens, and the lens expands it so we can see it. A scanning electron microscope is like radar. But instead of shooting sound waves out, it shoots electrons. And those electrons are super teeny tiny, which means they get a lot of detail. They get into every single nook and cranny of this thing. And whatever electrons bounce back off the object, back into the computer builds an image. So you're actually looking at a computerized image, but a very detailed one that looks real. And it's much more detailed than we would otherwise get. And then someone else went in and colorized it. So basically, for our purposes, this is a real neuron. And it has all of these structures coming out of it. Well, what is the point of these structures? The point is communication. That is a neuron's job, to communicate. It needs to learn things, information into the cell. That's what these things do. They soak up all the information, and then the cell processes it and then sends that information back out. And it goes to other neurons, and that's, again, another real picture. And these other neurons all are accepting and sending information to and from each other. Now I want to talk about something else that is designed for communication, because I think this is amazing the way shapes work. Remember, structures are designed for functions. The shape is designed for a job. And there is something else important to your life, not biology, but important for how you live your life, that is designed for communication. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking about a city. You happen to live in a city, right? You live in the city of Philadelphia. I'm not sure which city this is, but that's not important right now. This city was designed for communication. Way back in the day when this was made, this is America, so this was probably designed back in colonial times with Ben Franklin and George Washington and all the great the forefathers, right? So these guys did not have the internet. They did not have phones. What they had was mail. They would write it down on a letter and give it to somebody, give it to a mailman, and that mailman did not even have a car. He was on horseback, and he needed to get from point A to point B as quickly as possible. These cities were designed to allow people to move in the most convenient way possible, to spread information as quick as they can on horseback. And these people had no idea what the nervous system looked like. They had no idea what the neurons looked like when they built these cities. They just built it for communication. And they happened to come up with the exact same design as your neurons that are designed for communication. It's just weird how it all works. So this is a picture of the city. This is a picture of a neuron. And no, this was not a coincidence, because here's a different city with a different neuron. Right? Again, designed for communication, where all these roads all leading to the central hub where everyone is, and then a really big one leading out so it can go out to the next city over. And so this would be an axon going out to the next neuron over. Again, another city, another neuron. In fact, here is the picture taken from the International Space Station. You can actually see these were neurons, 3 cell bodies, right? Center city right here. That's why it's so bright, because it has the most lights. And have all these roads spreading outward so that information can come back in to that central hub. And then they have ones reaching out to the next neurons over. And they even have a really big road for spreading things very quickly, like the axon of the neuron, that big long tail. So they're all designed that same way for that same function. And your neurons are exactly the same as those cities. They're designed to spread the information outward. Your brain comes up with an idea, that's information. It spreads it down the spinal cord. If you remember the skeletal chapter, we had all the bones of the vertebrae. Those individual vertebral bones had spaces in between. And those spaces where each nerve came out. So this idea, this information can spread out and tell your body what to do. That's what it does. So if we're talking about the structure equaling function, let's talk about that structure of a neuron, the different parts of the neuron. Normally with the notes, I would have you guys fill this out with me. I have had a hard time figuring out how to help you guys label something on a Google Doc. So I just labeled it A, B, C, D, E, so it matches up with the A, B, C, D, E of your writing. So you just need to fill this in. A is a dendrite, right? This structure right here. This is the part of the cell that is reaching out and trying to learn the world around it. Now, normally, this is going to learn it from the next neuron over. Some neuron over here will be sending information out, and this guy will collect it and send the information to the cell body. Not all of them are like that, though. Some of them are going to be the first one in line, we'll call it, right? Like, if you clap your hands, someone gives you a high five, there's some pressure there. There are neurons that picked up that impact, that pressure. There was no neuron in front of them telling them it happened. They had firsthand experience. So those neurons would have specialized receptors on the dendrites. I'm not going to go into too much detail about it. We're going to have a whole chapter. But long story short, specialized receptors here whose job is to pick up pressure changes. So when someone gives you that high five, you get a pressure change on your hand. Those neurons, so those receptors pick up the pressure and then send information down the dendrite to the cell body, who processes that information. Or if another neuron knew about it first, they'll send neurotransmitters, chemicals out here, and those receptors will pick it up, the information, and send the information down. That information makes its way to what we call the cell body, what we learned back in Bio 1, right? That Bio 1 cell, when we were talking about all the organelles, the mitochondria, the lysosome, the endoplasmic reticulum, I'm blanking on words now, the ribosomes, all inside here, that's what's happening. The entirety of your biology year is happening in here. Especially if you remember protein synthesis, right? Creating proteins. Those proteins being made are your hormones. Those hormones, we call them neurotransmitters. And once they're made here, they're going to be stored down here. We'll get to that why in a little bit. Also inside this cell body is a nucleus because it is a cell. Eukaryotic cells have nuclei. There's a nucleus. And you would remember from Bio 1 that a nucleus has DNA. And the DNA is telling this neuron which hormones to make, which neurotransmitters to make. Because different neurons have different jobs to do. So which ones are important, the nucleus's job is to figure that one out. Leading on after that is this big long tail called the axon. And no, I'm not talking about the yellow part. I'm talking about inside the yellow part. You see a little purple here? A little purple here? Now, stemming off this purple cell body, going down to this purple over here. This is all the axon. And in your vocabulary yesterday, I went into detail about how that axon generates an electric impulse. I'm not going to go into that detail today, but an electric impulse is generated and sent down here. Why? Because down here, remember those proteins we talked about, those neurotransmitters that are stored here? That electric impulse is going to rush down and push those neurotransmitters out. And that is how this neuron is going to communicate, by electrically pushing out the neurotransmitters. Now we got to be careful with that electricity, so we have a protective covering. Now I'm looking at the yellow part. This protective covering called the myelin sheath. Now I'm not going to test you on this little orange dot, but just so you know, it's called a Schwann cell. This cell is also going through protein synthesis. Its proteins are becoming this yellow stuff. That yellow stuff is the myelin sheath. Its job is to keep the electricity in. We don't want the electricity escaping out because then it's going to stimulate some other neuron's axon, and that one will be sending off information, and now we just don't know which one is sending off information. Right now, we don't know where this information is coming from. That's like when you wake up in the morning and you're like, ow, my neck really hurts. No, wait, no, my shoulder. My shoulder hurt. No, my neck. Yeah, no, it's definitely my back. Yeah, that hurts. Oh, God, I have no idea where this pain's coming from. That's because information is spreading outward and you're stimulating the wrong neurons, and now your brain doesn't know where the pain's coming from. So the myelin sheath helps prevent that from happening. And then you have, at the very end of this axon, is what we call the axon terminal. Terminal means the end. Like the train terminal is the end of your ride. The axon terminal is the end of the axon. This is, like I said, all of those hormones, those neurotransmitters are stored here. They're made here in protein synthesis. We learned in Bio 1. They travel and stay here. The electric impulse is generated. It shoots down the line and pushes them out. And the next neuron over here someplace learns information. That one will send information to your brain, or another neuron who will send it to another neuron, eventually to your brain, and you will learn a thing. All right, since we're talking about these neurons and structures, guys, we are going to talk about 3 structures of a neuron, 3 different shapes that we care about. Why do we care about them? Because they're in your body. It doesn't really matter. They're all going to do the same basic job, same basic functions, but they're there, so we're going to learn it. We have what we call bipolar, unipolar, and multipolar. Now, skipping to the end, multipolar is what we're used to looking at. That's this guy. This is a multipolar neuron. But the other 2, bipolar and unipolar, these names come from the things coming out of the cell's body. Look in the beginning. First off, the word polar. You know what pole is? Like in the world, the Earth has 2 poles, a North Pole and a South Pole. We have 2 ends. Well, the cell here also has 2 ends. It has a North Pole and a South Pole. In Latin, we say that's bipolar. Bi means 2 in Latin. So bipolar neuron, 2 poles. One of these poles is going to be the dendrites, and one of these poles is going to be an axon. Unipolar, uni in Latin means 1. So it only has 1 pole, 1 thing coming out of the cell's body. Then that pole splits and becomes dendrites and axons, but they're joined, which I assume would be kind of confusing for the cell body, but hey, whatever, you do you, buddy. And then what we've been talking about, multipolar. Each structure coming out of this body is another pole. So this dendrite's a pole, this dendrite's a pole, this dendrite's a pole, you get a pole, and you get a pole, and you get a pole, and this one's an axon. At this point, guys, scientists just get lazy. All right, this means 1, this means 2, and after that, we got tired of counting, so we just say multiple. Multipolar. All right, now we need to classify neurons based on not just what they look like, but also what they do. And we're going to have 3 different functions of neurons. Yes, you have tons of different kinds of neurons, but those functions are in a different chapter based on those receptors that we talked about on the end of the dendrites. Right? Whole different chapter for that detail. Outside of those receptors, we're going to have 3 basic functions. One is sensory. Sensory neurons are responding to the environment around you. Some kind of change happened in the world around you, and your body needs to be aware of it. So you have neurons that are going to somehow read that. That somehow is the other chapter I talked about. The pressure changes, the light wavelength changes, the chemical changes on your tongue. Right? Different chapter, but once that information is gathered, they need to send it inward from one neuron to another neuron to another neuron, passing notes, whisper down the lane until eventually it gets to your spinal cord and your brain. And that is when you learn a thing. That is when the information is there. So really, this takes time. Look at this. This is really slowed down. Normally, it would actually be like almost instant. You couldn't even perceive the difference, but it does technically take time. So by the time your brain is aware of it, it's already happened. It's over. Someone shines a flashlight in your face, and guess what, guys? When you're aware it's happening, that person's already gone. Someone gives you a high five and you're aware of it, that high five is in the past. You are living in the past. How weird is that? Not one of you actually exists in the present in terms of consciousness. You're not aware of the present. You're lagging behind, everyone. Oh, that's just weird. Anyway, once you learn something, you have to do something about it. So once your brain says, idea, we're not going to spread that idea out to the body. These are called motor neurons that do that. And you've learned the words me talk not good. Let me rewind and say that again. You have already learned about motor neurons. All right, cut. All right, 5-minute break. I need to go take a nap. All right, let me try this one more time. You have already learned about motor neurons last chapter. Whew, that sounded good. Last chapter, guys, when the motor neuron was telling the muscle what to do, right? Same one here. A bunch of motor neurons, though, not just one, leading from the spinal cord, spreading outward, talking to each other until eventually that message gets to whatever body part you're talking about. That is what motor neurons do. They tell you what's going on. And I skipped something. Interneurons. There's a go-between. The sensory information goes in, the motor neuron information comes out, but your brain and spinal cord have to process that information and come up with that decision. So they are their own type of neuron called interneurons. Your brain takes the information from the sensory neurons, reads it, understands it, processes it, comes up with a decision, and then sends it back out in the motor neurons. Your brain is interneurons. And so is your spinal cord, by the way. Your spinal cord can also come up with decisions. That's right, guys. You're thinking with your back. You're not actually thinking. You're not aware of those thoughts. We call those reflexes. Your spinal cord will handle your body's reflexes so that you don't have to worry about it. But it is still a decision. Those are still interneurons. And guys, and that is where we are going to call it on the notes. Right now, you have an assignment. This is what you are working on for the time being. So we have more than 10 minutes. I don't think this should take you 10 minutes to do once it loads. But you will have a neuron right here. Neuron, I can never pronounce that correctly. Neuron. And you have to label the different parts. I have them right here. This is your word bank. And it is drag and drop. You just move it over to whichever line you think is labeling that word. Nice and easy, right? Page 2. What is the structural classification of the neuron on the previous page? I mean, based on what it looks like, what kind is this? Is this a bipolar, unipolar, or multipolar neuron? And you'll just put the answer right here. Now we got 2 other kinds. And you're going to draw them right here. So you're going to take your pen function, and you're going to draw me some kind of neuron. Doesn't have to be neat or pretty. This is not art class. But you're going to tell me which one you drew right here. And then draw the other one and tell me what it is right here. And then here, you're just going to define sensory, motor, and interneuron in your own words, guys. I don't care about my words. I made the notes. I know what those words are. I want you to tell me in your own words. Make it make sense. Prove to me that you know what the words mean. All right? That is your assignment right now. I'm going to end my recording. If anyone has any questions, comments, or concerns, you may ask me in 3, 2,